They want a show, he mutters under his breath, rubbing his calloused palms. Always want a show. The stage explodes with light and applause. Jimmy strides out with his signature smile, waving to the crowd. The audience is packed, people from their 20s to 70s, but mostly over 55, those who grew up on The Sopranos and Scorsese films. They're here to see Tony, but also to see if he'll address the scandal. "Good evening, Los Angeles." Jimmy calls, and the crowd roars back. "We've got a hot one tonight, because we've got the legend himself, Tony Sirico from The Sopranos. But first, have you seen what's going on online?" The audience laughs. Someone whistles. Jimmy pauses, his eyes scanning the crowd. He knows what he says next could either fan the flames or douse them. All right, we'll get to that," he jokes, pivoting to political news. "You know, in Washington, they're fighting over taxes again. Some say, give more money to regular folks. Others say, no, it's all for the rich. Me? I'm just thinking, maybe give me a discount on coffee, and I'll be happy." The crowd chuckles. Jimmy knows how to warm them up, but his mind is elsewhere. He catches a glimpse of Tony waiting backstage, his figure in a dark suit like a ghost from the past. Jimmy feels this night could be a triumph or a disaster. Tony steps onto the stage to thunderous applause. He smiles, waves, but his eyes are sharp like a boxer before a fight. Jimmy shakes his hand and invites him to sit. The first few minutes go smoothly. They joke about old times, reminisce about The Sopranos, and laugh about how Tony used to intimidate younger actors with his real-life gangster past. "Tony, be honest," Jimmy says with a wink. "Did you ever use your experience on set?" "Oh, Jimmy," Tony chuckles, his voice raspy but warm. "I just gave them a look, and they did everything right." The audience erupts in laughter. But the tension creeps back when Jimmy gently broaches the main topic. "Okay, Tony, you know what people are saying. All these posts online." Jimmy pauses, letting the crowd react. Someone shouts, "De Niro," and the room ripples with laughter and whispers. Tony tenses. His fingers grip the armrest. He knows what he says next could change everything. "Jimmy, I respect Robert De Niro. Always have," he begins, his voice slow but firm. "We come from the same world, the same streets. But someone took my words, twisted them, and threw them into this. What's it called? Twitter or whatever." "X, Tony, it's X now," Jimmy corrects softly, and the crowd laughs. "Whatever's called," Tony waves a hand. "I didn't call him an idiot. I said we've got different views. And you know what? That's okay. We don't all have to think the same." The room quiets. A few clap, but most wait for what's next. Jimmy senses the moment is pivotal. He could push, squeeze more emotion from Tony for ratings, but something in the old actor's eye stops him. "Tony, you talk about respect," Jimmy says carefully. "But people online, they think you're attacking an icon. How do you explain that?" Tony falls silent for a moment. His eyes narrow, as if recalling something from long ago. Then he leans forward, his voice softer but piercing the room. "I grew up in Brooklyn, Jimmy, where words had weight. You said something, you owned it. Today, people write whatever, without looking you in the eye. I didn't attack De Niro. I said he's wrong about some things. And I'm ready to say it to his face if he wants to talk." The audience erupts in applause. But backstage, a producer whispers into a walkie-talkie. "Push him, Jimmy, this is gold." Jimmy ignores it. He sees in Tony not just an aging actor, but a man fighting to preserve his dignity in a world where truth is just clickbait. The show continues, but the tension lingers. Jimmy steers the conversation to lighter topics, but the crowd still buzzes from Tony's words. During a commercial break, Tony pulls Jimmy aside. "Listen," he says quietly, his hand gripping Jimmy's shoulder. "I know you've got to do a show, but don't turn this into a circus, okay? I don't want this to be me against De Niro. It's about how they make us all tear each other apart." Jimmy nods, but his mind races. He knows the producers want a spectacle. He knows ratings depend on it. But he also sees in Tony a man on the edge between his past and a modern world that dissects his every move. When the show resumes, Jimmy makes an unexpected move. You know, he says, looking into the camera, we all love big headlines. But maybe it's time we start listening to each other instead of shouting. Tony, what would you say to Robert De Niro if he were here? Tony smiles, for the first time that night, genuinely. I'd say, Robert, come on, let's grab a coffee. Talk like the old days. No cameras, no Twitter. Just two guys from Brooklyn. The audience applauds, but this time, the applause feels warm, sincere. Jimmy feels the tension in his chest ease. He knows the producers will be unhappy, but for the first time in a while, he feels he's done something right. The show wraps, and Tony heads backstage. The crowd disperses, but a sense lingers that something significant happened. Jimmy sits in his dressing room, scrolling through his phone. Posts about Tony still flood the internet, but new ones emerge. Tony Sirico calls for dialogue. Why can't we just talk? Tony, now in his coat, pauses at the studio's exit. The night air of Los Angeles smells of asphalt and distant ocean. He pulls out his phone, hesitates, then dials a number. Robert, he says when the other end picks up. It's Tony. We need to talk. What happens next, no one knows. But in this moment, under the dim glow of a streetlight, it feels like a small step toward understanding has been taken. Los Angeles, the morning after the broadcast. The sun barely cuts through the smog hanging over the city, but the streets already hum with cars and early pedestrians. Tony Sirico sits in his West Hollywood apartment, holding a mug of strong coffee. The scent of freshly ground espresso mingles with the faint smell of old leather furniture. On the table before him lies his phone, its screen flashing with new notifications. Tony doesn't rush to check them. After last night's show, he feels drained but oddly calm. His words on air seem to have resonated, but he knows the online storm hasn't subsided. Outside, car horns blare, and a dog barks in the distance. Tony sips his coffee, his gaze wandering the room. Old photos from the Sopranos set, a faded Goodfellas poster, a framed letter from a fan who wrote that Paulie Walnuts inspired him to turn his life around. Tony smiles faintly, but his thoughts drift back to Robert De Niro. Last night, after the call, they agreed to meet. Today, 2 p.m. at a quiet cafe on Melrose Avenue. Tony doesn't know what to expect, but he feels this conversation is necessary for both of them. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel sits in his office at the studio. His desk is cluttered with papers, scripts, and empty coffee cups outside the window. Hollywood rooftops stretch into the distance, but Jimmy doesn't notice. He's scrolling through X on his laptop, reading reactions to last night's show. Some posts praise his restraint, others accuse him of going soft. One commenter writes, Kimmel's lost his edge. Where's the old Jimmy who tore into guests? Jimmy sighs, closes the laptop, and rubs his temples. He knows the producers are unhappy. Last night's episode got high ratings, but didn't deliver the viral moment they wanted. The office door opens and Linda, the executive producer, steps in, her face grim. Jimmy, we need to talk, she says, sitting across from him. Her voice is firm, but her eyes betray exhaustion. I know what you're going to say, Jimmy replies, leaning back in his chair. We didn't make a circus, and I don't regret it. This isn't about a circus, Linda snaps. It's about missing a chance. Tony Sirico versus De Niro, that could have been everywhere. X news memes. And you chose to play peacemaker. Linda. Jimmy leans forward, his voice low but tense. I don't want to be part of a machine that rips people apart for clicks. Tony said something real last night. I wasn't going to drown him. Linda sighs, her fingers drumming on the desk. I get it, Jimmy. But this is a show. We sell emotions. If you're not ready to play the game, the network will start looking for someone else. Then let them look, Jimmy shoots back, but his voice wavers. He knows it's not an empty threat. At 1:50 p.m., Tony walks into Melrose Bean, a small cafe with wooden tables, faded movie posters on the walls, and the aroma of freshly baked croissants. Outside, the street hums, but inside, it's quiet, with only soft jazz playing. Tony picks a corner table by the window and orders another coffee. His fingers tap nervously on the table, but he keeps his composure. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opens and Robert De Niro steps in. He's wearing dark sunglasses, a gray sweater, and jeans, looking more like an ordinary guy than a Hollywood icon. Tony stands, and they exchange a brief handshake. The air is thick with tension, but neither shows it. Tony, De Niro nods, sitting down. He removes his sunglasses, and his sharp, slightly tired eyes meet Tony's. "Robert," Tony replies, his voice steady. "Thanks for coming." A waitress brings coffee, and for a moment, the conversation stalls. Tony takes a sip. De Niro studies his cup, as if searching for answers in it. "So what was that last night?" De Niro finally asks, his voice low but not hostile. "I heard what you said. About respect, about Brooklyn. But I also saw those headlines." "Robert, I didn't say what they claim," Tony says, his fingers tightening around the mug. "Someone took an old interview, chopped it up, and made a show out of it. I said I disagree with your views." "That's it." De Niro nods, his face unreadable. "You know how this works, Tony. Words get twisted. But why didn't you call me sooner? We're not strangers." "I thought you wouldn't want to talk," Tony admits honestly. "With all this noise. People want us to fight, Robert. It sells." De Niro pauses, his fingers slowly stirring his coffee. "Maybe you're right," he says at last. "But I don't want to be part of that. We're both from Brooklyn. We know what respect means. So tell me straight, what did you mean when you said I was wrong?" Tony takes a deep breath. He knows what he says next could either derail their talk or open the door to real dialogue. "Your political statements," he begins, choosing his words carefully. "You're always out there telling people to pick this side or that. But I think it just divides people. We're not politicians, Robert. We're actors. Our job is to show truth through stories, not tell people who to vote for." De Niro raises an eyebrow, but doesn't interrupt. Tony continues, "I'm not saying you don't have the right to speak. But when you do it so loudly, people stop seeing the actor. They see a billboard. And I think that hurts what we both love, film." Silence falls. The waitress passes by, carrying a plate of sandwiches, but neither Tony nor De Niro notices. Finally, De Niro speaks. "You think I've gone too far?" "I think we can all go too far if we don't listen to each other," Tony replies. "I don't want to fight, Robert. I want us to remember who we are." De Niro smiles, faintly but genuinely. "You know, Tony, you're still that same Brooklyn guy. Always straight to the point." They laugh, and the tension between them dissipates like morning fog. The conversation shifts to memories, old shoots, mutual friends, funny stories from the 70s. But deep down, Tony knows this is just the beginning. Their talk is only a small step in a world where conflict sells better than reconciliation. Meanwhile, Jimmy returns to the studio after lunch. In the corridor, Linda intercepts him, this time holding a tablet. "Look at this," she says, showing the screen. X is exploding. People are sharing clips from last night's show. Some call Tony a hero. Others say he's a dinosaur. But you know what? They want more. More. Jimmy echoes, his brows shooting up. "Linda, we're not a soap opera." "Maybe not," she replies, her eyes gleaming. "But we could invite De Niro." Picture it. Tony and Robert in one episode. It'd be historic. Jimmy feels his stomach tighten. He knows it could save his reputation with the network. But he also remembers Tony's words, "Don't make a circus." Jimmy stands at a crossroads, and the choice he makes could change everything. That evening, Tony sits on his apartment balcony, watching the lights of Los Angeles. In his hand is a glass of red wine. In his mind, thoughts of today's conversation. He doesn't know if it will change the world, but it changed something in him. He feels he's reclaimed a part of himself, the part that believed words carry weight. Somewhere in the city, De Niro sits in his car, listening to an old Frank Sinatra record. He thinks about Tony, their talk, and how easily the world makes people forget who they are. He pulls out his phone and sends a short text, Tony, thanks. Let's do it again, but skip the coffee. Whiskey's better. Tony smiles, reading the message. He doesn't know what tomorrow holds, but for the first time in a long time, he feels he's on the right path. Below, the streets of Los Angeles pulse, loud, chaotic, but full of possibilities for those willing to listen. Los Angeles, a week after the cafe meeting. The morning sun bathes the city in soft golden light, but in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio, a tense silence reigns. Tonight's episode is being called historic. After heated online debates and pressure from producers, Jimmy agreed to invite Tony Sirico and Robert De Niro together on the show. The idea was risky, but Linda, the executive producer, insisted. This is either a bombshell or a triumph, Jimmy. Either way, we're in the spotlight. In his West Hollywood apartment, Tony Sirico stands before a mirror, adjusting a dark blazer. His hands tremble, not from fear, but from anticipation. The past week has been restless. After his talk with De Niro at the cafe, the internet exploded with new posts. Some praised Tony for seeking reconciliation. Others accused him of sucking up to De Niro. But Tony ignored the comments. He knows tonight is a chance to say something meaningful, not for ratings, but for himself. The smell of fresh coffee fills the apartment, mingling with the faint scent of cologne. On the table lies an old watch Tony wore in the 70s. He slips it on, like a talisman. Outside, the city hums. Car horns, kids' laughter as they run to school, the distant drone of a helicopter. Tony takes a deep breath and leaves the apartment. Today, he's not just an actor, but a man who wants to leave a mark. Meanwhile, Robert De Niro sits in his parked car near the studio. The driver has turned off the engine, and the cabin is quiet, save for the muffled street noise. De Niro holds his phone, scrolling through messages from friends and colleagues. Most urge caution, don't let Kimmel trap you. Tony might pull something unexpected. But De Niro isn't worried. Their cafe conversation showed Tony isn't an enemy, but a man of principle. Still, De Niro knows tonight's show will test them both. Time to go, he says quietly to the driver, and the car heads toward the studio. Backstage, chaos reigns. Technicians test microphones, camera operators adjust lenses, and producers dart around with tablets, finalizing details. The smell of hot spotlights mixes with the aroma of pizza someone brought for the crew. Jimmy Kimmel stands in his dressing room, staring into a mirror. His usual confidence wanes. He feels tonight's show could define not just ratings, but who he is as a host. Linda bursts in without knocking, her eyes gleaming with impatience. Jimmy, the house is packed. Social media's buzzing. This is our shot, she says, holding a printout of X trends. I know Linda, Jimmy replies, his voice tight. But I don't want this to be a circus. Tony and Robert deserve respect. Then make it real, Linda snaps. But don't forget, we're putting on a show. Jimmy nods, but his thoughts are elsewhere. He recalls Tony's words. It's about how they make us all tear each other apart. Tonight, he wants to prove a show can be more. The stage erupts with light and music. The crowd roars as Jimmy steps out with his signature grin. The audience, mostly over 55, those who remember Hollywood's golden age, is electric with anticipation. They hold signs reading Sopranos Forever and De Niro Rules. Jimmy raises his hands, calming the crowd. Good evening, Los Angeles, he shouts. Tonight's a special one. Two legends, two guys from Brooklyn, two men who aren't afraid to speak their truth. Give it up for Tony Sirico and Robert De Niro. The audience explodes in applause. Tony and De Niro walk out together, exchanging a brief handshake. Tony, in a dark suit, looks like an old-school gangster. De Niro, in a simple gray shirt, like a man who needs no proof of his stature. They sit, and the room hushes, waiting for what's next. Jimmy starts light, reminiscing about their shared work, joking about old times. Tony laughs, recounting how he scared young actors on the Soprano set, while De Niro shares a story about easy, making him reshoot a scene 20 times. The crowd roars, but the tension lingers. Everyone's waiting for the main event. All right, gentlemen. Jimmy leans forward, his tone growing serious. You know why everyone's here. A week ago, Tony was with us, and we talked about, well, let's call it loud headlines. Tony, Robert, what's going on? Tony glances at Niro, who gives a subtle nod. Tony speaks first. Jimmy, I said last time, I respect Robert De Niro. Always have. What they're writing online, that's not my words. Robert and I talked. And you know what? We don't have to be enemies to disagree. The crowd claps, but someone shouts, tell the truth. Jimmy raises a hand, quieting the room. Robert, your turn, he says. What do you think about this? De Niro pauses, his fingers tapping the armrest. Then he speaks, his voice low and measured. I heard what Tony said, and I appreciate his honesty. We come from different worlds, but the same roots. Brooklyn taught us respect isn't about always agreeing. It's about listening. I listened to Tony. He thinks I'm too loud about politics. Maybe he's right. The room goes silent. No one expected De Niro to concede. Tony smiles but doesn't interrupt. But I won't stop saying what I believe, De Niro continues. Still, I learned something from Tony. We don't have to tear each other apart to make a point. We can talk, like people. The audience erupts in applause. Jimmy feels the tension in his chest dissolve. He knows this isn't the bombshell the producers wanted, but it's something bigger, a moment when two men showed dialogue is possible in a world fueled by conflict. You know, Jimmy adds, looking into the camera, we all love drama. But maybe it's time to learn to listen. Tony, Robert, what would you say to the people watching right now? Tony, his voice raspy but strong. Listen to each other. Not Twitter, not headlines, people. Sit down for a coffee. You'd be surprised how much you can understand. De Niro nods. And paid to disagree. But do it with respect. We're all in this together. The crowd rises, applauding. Jimmy feels his eyes well up, but hides it behind a smile. He knows this moment will linger. The broadcast ends, and Tony and De Niro head backstage. They share another handshake, this one warmer. De Niro claps Tony on the shoulder. Whiskey next time, all right, he says with a grin. Only if you're buying, Tony quips, and they laugh. Jimmy stays in the studio, watching the audience file out. Linda approaches, holding her tablet. It wasn't a bombshell, she says, her voice softer than usual. But it was good, Jimmy. Really good. Thanks, Linda, he replies, and for the first time in a while, he feels he's done something right. That night, Tony sits on his balcony, holding a glass of whiskey. The lights of Los Angeles twinkle below, like fallen stars. He thinks of Brooklyn, old times, the people who've come and gone from his life. He doesn't know if his talk with De Niro will change the world, but it changed him. And that's enough. De Niro, in his apartment, flips through an old book on film. He thinks of Tony, their conversation, and how easy it is to forget what it means to be human in a world demanding spectacle. He smiles, recalling Tony's words, just talk. Maybe that's the answer. Online new posts appear. Tony and De Niro call for dialogue. Why can't we be like this? They don't go viral, but they touch those who read them. Small ripples of change spread, subtle but real. The next morning, Tony wakes to a phone call. It's a young director pitching a small role in a new film, a story about two old friends learning to listen to each other. Tony smiles, listening to the offer. He doesn't know if he'll take it, but the idea feels right. Somewhere in the city, De Niro meets a journalist eager to discuss his political views. But this time, De Niro shifts the tone. He talks not about who to vote for, but about the importance of hearing each other. The journalist looks surprised, but scribbles every word. And Jimmy Kimmel sits in his office, planning the next episode. He knows not every show will be like last night, but he feels he's found a new path, one where a show can be more than entertainment. The world keeps spinning, loud and chaotic. But in small moments, a conversation over coffee, a sincere word, a handshake, hope is born. And maybe, just maybe, it's a start.